174. And we'll start with oogenesis, and then we'll talk about the ovarian cycle. And then at the very end, I'll go over the basic anatomy of the female reproductive system. I would say this stuff that I have up on the board today is definitely the most complicated part. And that's because the ovarian cycle and oogenesis are complicated processes. The timing is just completely different than what it is from what we saw in the male reproductive system. And so that's why I really want to make sure we understand the timeline. And you're going to hear me emphasize time a lot in these first two parts. So let's go ahead and have your manual open to page 174, and you can be taking notes as we go and ask your questions as we go as well. So first thing I want to talk about is the start. Oogenesis refers to the creation of oocytes. And that's what the female gametes are called. So we had spermatocytes last time, and then for the males, this week in females, we are calling them oocytes. So that's why we have oogenesis. Recall that genesis means creation. So it's the creation of eggs. So here I want to emphasize a part of your lab manual that the timeline that's on the left-hand side of your lab manual. It says before birth. And that is really important that we understand this concept, that when a little girl is growing inside of mama's womb, her tiny little ovaries are very active. They are going through this process right here. So if it helps, if you're like me, I tend, and there's a lot of stuff on here. So I personally like to take this and maybe kind of group all of this, okay? Because really what I have, oh, and I forgot to put that up here. Sorry, let me grab a marker real fast. Okay. I was wondering why that looked funny. Okay, so all of this first part is happening before birth, and then we're born, and then the next part of the timeline is when puberty hits. So think big picture. Little girl is in utero, she's forming, then she's born, and then everything kind of stops. We hit the pause button until she goes through puberty. And that's what this whole thing up to this point is representing. It's actually puberty to menopause, so that this process continues to happen until a woman starts menopause, then this stops. And then we also have a little part in here that addresses if a woman gets pregnant. So you could see, oh my word, that's a lot of different things to keep track of. We just have one little flow chart here, but we're saying baby girl in utero, she's a newborn. Okay, now she's an adolescent. We have a premenopausal and a menopausal woman, and then we have a pregnant woman. Right? So we'll go through this very slowly and explain exactly what kind of woman, I don't know if that's the correct way to say it, but what stage of lady we're talking about with these different levels here. So let's start at the top. Very similar to what we had last week, we have the oogonium. That's just singular for oogonia. And you'll notice it's a diploid. So we start off with 2N and we go through mitosis. And so we're just going to make, remember, mitosis is you're just hitting the copy button. So we're just making copies, copies, copies. And so we end up with many oogonia. Again, All of this is happening inside a little girl's ovaries while she's developing as a baby inside the womb. Incredible to think of that. Here's a little interesting piece of information if you haven't heard this before. Okay, think about this. Think about a baby, a little girl's ovaries doing this while she's a baby inside the womb. Okay, think of your mother. When your mother was in the womb, in your grandmother's womb, her ovaries produced half of you. So really, half of you was inside of your grandmother, right? Sometimes students get really disturbed when I tell them that. But that's true, right? When your mother was a developing baby, her ovaries were creating oocytes. She was born with all the oocytes she's ever going to have. So half of you was inside of her when she was a baby, inside of your grandmother's womb, which means half of you was inside your grandma. What? Okay. Some people are like, I'm very disturbed by this. Quit telling me those facts. I hate those facts. They're creepy. Hey, that's just how it works sometimes. I think that's cool. Okay, so back to the chart. We're going to have growth and differentiation. Remember, many oogonia were still diploid because they're just copies. We're going to have growth and differentiation, and they will end up becoming what we call primary oocytes. Okay, now notice that the primary oocytes are still diploids. All we're saying is that this oocyte has matured a little bit while it's been developing, okay, inside the ovaries. And this is what a little girl has at birth. So all these numbers you see here, these numbers are just insane, by the way, okay? Before birth, approximately 7 million primary oocytes. When I read stuff like that, I'm just like, okay, who counted that? Who counted that? Did you really count that, right? I know we have these ways we just, we guesstimate that, but that's just insane, right? Kind of grody sounding too, 7 million eggs, ugh, right? Not all of them are going to continue on to mature, right? So a lot of them are going to, and we can see that as we go along the timeline. Before birth, a woman has approximately 7 million primary oocytes, okay? And this is between the two ovaries. And then at birth, oh, I'm sorry, that was before birth. And then at birth, she has approximately 1 to 2 million. So you can see there's a drastic decrease in number of oocytes by the time she's born. And then that number dwindles even more because then we have about 400,000 by puberty. So this is what happens. She's born with these primary oocytes. Her ovaries hit the pause button and they're just hanging out, okay? They're gonna hang out for approximately 11 to 14 years when that little girl then starts puberty, that awful, dreadful time in all of our lives, right? Ladies, this is when we went and we were towering over the guys, right? That's kind of cool. We talk about that in AP1 because estrogen is a very strong instigator of growth, right? So that's why girls tend to shoot up and they're taller than all the boys, but then it's short-lived. So that's why men who have a lot of testosterone being dumped into their bodies, they continue to grow longer. So just kind of relating hormones with stuff we saw in the skeletal system. And then at puberty, that is going to basically awaken her ovaries, okay? What is the actual event that is kind of awakening her ovaries? It's her period, her menstrual cycle. And the menstrual cycle is the big picture concept for today. That event is what is going to, we're basically going to fit all of this stuff on the board in the timeline with a woman's period. Okay, and kind of talk about why does a woman have to have a period approximately once a month. So, okay, question. So Michelle said, why is the decrease? Okay, so I'm so sorry, I didn't see the timing of the question. Decrease of the primary oocytes. So, okay, so the 7 million to 1 to 2 million. I don't know what causes the decrease, but only some of them are going, and I don't know if it's, I don't know exactly what determines which oocytes can hang on. If it's something that's, that has to do with the genetic material inside. I would have to read more about that to see what exactly causes that drastic of a decrease, and which ones are kind of left to hang out. Because obviously, even at puberty, we're saying we have approximately 400,000. Well, at puberty, kind of a little tidbit, a little foreshadowing of what we're going to look at is every month a female is going to ovulate 1 oocyte typically. Okay, there are lots of other things that can there are lots of other discussions we can have, but we're kind of starting off of what we generally see. And so you could see if she's only ovulating approximately once a month, 1 egg, that's 12 oocytes a year. Even in her lifetime, she's not going to release 400,000 oocytes. So it's a very, very curious thing. Okay, Donna, great question. Is oocyte the same as ovum? It is not. And I'm so glad you asked that, because I am going to emphasize that a lot once we get to that part. Ovum is a very important, different thing. So I'm glad you asked that. Okay, so this primary oocyte. Okay, so now we're saying this little girl, she has started puberty. Okay, meaning she is about to have her first menstrual cycle. Very quickly, let me grab this model. Just as a reminder, what is the menstrual cycle? Do you guys remember, either from your notes or from the Wednesday session, what is the innermost lining of the uterus called? Yes, very good. Yes, very good. The endometrium. And the endometrium has a couple of layers. You guys, just for my class, you just have to know endometrium, but we do have like a functional layer and that function, and then a deeper layer. But the functional layer is what gets shed. So why does a woman bleed once a month? It's because the endometrial part of the endometrial lining is actually shedding and coming out. Okay. When that starts, this primary oocyte, or right before that starts, I should say, this primary oocyte is then going to go through meiosis 1. Ooh, okay, so we've been saying mitosis. Remember, mitosis is just taking it to the copy machine, getting an exact copy, right? Meiosis is what, though? We also call that reduction division. When you see here, read meiosis, you're kind of thinking, all right, if I'm a diploid, I'm going to very soon go to a what? I started as a diploid, but now I'm going to go to a, yeah, very good, haploid. Yeah, so the sex cells, and when we think of sex cells, we think of haploids. Yeah, very good. Okay, so when we go through meiosis 1, we are going to produce a secondary oocyte. And you see that I just marked right here that this is N. Remember, the 1 is understood. This will happen every single month. Again, many women have irregular menses, irregular cycles, we're just assuming that approximately every 28 days a female is going through this. But every 28 days approximately, until she hits menopause, her ovaries will go through this cycle. A primary oocyte, one of them will go through meiosis 1. Remember, meiosis is PMAT times 2, meaning we're going to go through prophase, metaphase, anaphase, telophase twice. Meiosis 1 is going to produce a secondary oocyte. And then in the female cycle, we produce these small little sections. So instead of 2 cells, pretty much all the genetic material is going to go to 1 cell. And then we just have leftovers. That's how you can think of that. And those little leftovers are called polar bodies. And those polar bodies simply degenerate. So whereas last week in spermatogenesis, we were producing 4 sperm, okay? Here, at the end of the day, we're only producing 1 egg, even though we're going through meiosis. And the way that we can think of that is because we have these polar bodies. Okay. So you guys doing okay? Give me a thumbs up if you're doing all right with so far this. Okay, good. All right, so then this secondary oocyte, my note here says, shed in menses if fertilization does not occur. Meaning this right here will end up going into the uterus and gets shed. A female's period is a way for her body to hit the reset button every month. Why is her uterus hitting the reset button? To prepare for pregnancy. That's the whole purpose of the uterus. It's the womb. It's the home of the child. So if the woman does not become pregnant, then it's kind of like house cleaning. That endometrial lining will shed, and then it just rebuilds and prepares for the next cycle. So if she does not become pregnant, that secondary oocyte, that's as far as she went, okay? Another way that I like to explain this to help students conceptualize it, if a woman has never been pregnant, this is as far as she's gotten, okay? If a woman has never been pregnant, she has only gotten to this stage. So now let's talk about what's happening down here, okay? And that's why I like to kind of draw a dotted line basically above where it says meiosis 2. Or draw a little line over here. Okay. If this oocyte, so the secondary oocyte, we're going to look into we're going to look at these follicles over here in just a second, and you'll see how I've tied that over. But if this secondary oocyte becomes fertilized, meaning if a sperm has penetrated the egg, which would happen, so when ovulation occurs, the egg gets released from the ovary, okay? The fimbriae are going to descend and kind of draw that ovary up into the uterine tube, which is really incredible to think about. Fertilization, the prime real estate for that is that ampulla with a widened portion, okay, which we looked at on Wednesday. If that egg gets fertilized, then and only then will that secondary oocyte, so I've drawn a little sperm here, okay? The sperm's going, yay! And it's going to make contact with the secondary oocyte. If that secondary oocyte gets fertilized, that is what an ovum is. Okay, so an ovum is when a sperm has penetrated the secondary oocyte. So the way I like to think of this is women who have been pregnant are the only ones who have ever gotten to this stage of the flow chart. Does that make sense to you guys? So you can see the arrows and the pictures, they kind of look similar to what we looked at with the sperm production, but it is quite different. It is quite different, but it's helpful to kind of, I think it's helpful to talk about spermatogenesis first and to kind of get the pattern and then the basics of mitosis and meiosis, because then when we get to this, which is definitely more complicated, it's a bit easier to comprehend. Okay, so the ovum is a fertilized secondary oocyte. Now it is still a haploid. And I know this tends to confuse students sometimes because you're like, wait, sperm plus egg, isn't that haploid, haploid, diploid? Yes, but there is a smidge of a time before we have the sharing of genetic material when before that happens. So that little moment of time before we have the switching of DNA, we're at this ovum stage. And I have a note, story to be continued next week. When we talk about embryological and fetal development, this is where I pick up. I pick up right here where the sperm fertilized the egg, and now we're assuming conception has happened, and then that little life starts to form. So that's where we'll start next week, okay? So ovum, very different from an oocyte. Here are my questions. Okay, so how about we go over some of these questions just to kind of see how we understand this. So number one, the blank are found originally on the outer surface of the ovary. So what are found on the outer surface of the ovary? The oogonia. Yep, very good. And will develop into what? Which are all formed before birth. Yes, very good. Primary oocytes. Okay, so number one, the oogonia are found originally on the outer surface of the ovary and will develop into primary oocytes. Okay. And then just hours before ovulation. So remember, we hit the pause button right here. But then puberty starts, and one at a time. And the ovaries, by the way, so, okay, that model only shows one. So we're assuming a woman has both of her ovaries once a month. Generally speaking, they're gonna take turns. So maybe January, it's the right one. February, it's the left one. March, it's the right one. April, it's the left one. And they are ejecting one oocyte approximately every month. Okay, so one of those oocytes will go through meiosis 1, forming two haploid cells. One large, what? Secondary oocyte. Very good. So it will form a very large secondary oocyte, and then one very small, what? Polar body. Excellent. And that polar body degenerates. Okay, number 5, true or false? If the secondary oocyte is not fertilized, it degenerates. Yes, true. And it degenerates actually quite quickly, between 24 and 48 hours. That that secondary oocyte doesn't last long. That's why when we talk about the ovarian cycle, there's prime window for fertilization, and that refers to the timing of ovulation and when sperm would be able to fertilize that oocyte. Okay, true or false? Oogonia are only present in the ovaries before birth. Yes, true. So number 6, oogonia are only present before birth. That is true, because by the time she is born, they have all turned into what? So a way, you know, you've likely heard a woman is born with all the eggs she'll ever have in her life. Maybe you should say a woman is born with all the primary oocytes she'll have in her lifetime. And this is why, for women at least, age is a risk factor in pregnancy, because her eggs, her oocytes, are as old as she is, right? So that's another thing. You think of those of you who have children, okay, the ladies have children, your child, half of your child is as old as you are. What? Right? This is just one of those things. I love talking about this because you're just like, okay, don't tell your kids that. They'll probably just be like, I don't want to hear that, Mom. Okay. But it's true, right? But time just tends to do a number on our body. So the older we are, the more environmental factors might affect our bodies, the more time mutations have to have the ability to occur, at least, or the chance. So this is why an older a woman is when she becomes pregnant, there tends to be an increased risk for complications, but by no means is that like across the board. I would not say that is the norm. It's just a pattern that is seen, but that makes sense when you think of how long those oocytes have been in her body. That's really cool to think about, actually. Okay, so then number 7, true or false? An ovum is produced every month. An ovum is produced every month. So this one will be false. So why is this one false? An ovum is only produced if she becomes what? Pregnant, yeah, right? Or just right before pregnancy, right before conception, right? Yeah, so only if that egg is fertilized. So maybe 1 month that ovum gets fertilized, but if that pregnancy continues, can she produce an ovum the next month? No, she can't. That's impossible. So yeah, only secondary oocytes are produced once a month. Ovums are only produced if fertilization occurs. Yeah, very good. Okay, so
what did you say, number 3?
Oh yeah, I'm sorry, I just went right over that one. Okay, so ovulation is the release of what? It's a secondary oocyte. So a secondary oocyte is what gets ejected from the ovary every month. If that secondary oocyte gets fertilized, now it's an ovum. If it doesn't get fertilized, it degenerates. Okay, so are you guys okay on oogenesis? What do you guys think of that?
Yes.
Okay. Good, not too bad. So if that looked a little daunting or confusing to you, hopefully, I like to tell a story like that. I find that telling a story frequently helps it, helps the information become more palatable. You kind of get away from the whole just like daunting details, and it's like, oh, okay, that makes a little bit more sense. So now what we need to do is we're going to talk about the ovarian cycle, which is this stuff right here. But I just want to draw your attention to this little piece of information right here. This is referring to the follicles, and that is what I am about to focus on. Okay, so you want to have both of these open, you can, and we will also answer these questions together. But let me first explain page 175. So come with me as we go across the room a little bit. Oh, and I want to make sure that you can see how everything fits together. Okay. So these oocytes, those are the gametes. And notice I've just drawn them as like little black circles over here. And I've continued that image over here. So these little black circles are the oocytes. So it's the same thing. But what do you notice on these images over here that I've drawn out? We have things what? Surrounding the oocyte, right? And that is the difference between an oocyte and a follicle, okay? So this ovarian cycle, not only do we need to be aware of how the oocyte itself matures and develops, but there are specialized cells. They're actually called follicular cells that surround that oocyte. So a follicle is going to be the oocyte, excuse me. It will be the oocyte plus the follicle cells. And the follicle cells are what I've drawn in purple. Okay, and that's why I've also written out follicle in purple. Okay. So let's start off. Let me just draw your attention to what this says right here in your lab manual. So it says primary oocytes. Okay, yes, so you can see. So primary oocytes are found in all primordial, primary, secondary, and mature follicles. So that is why you don't have to draw this out. To me, it's just kind of a nice visual to connect these two pages together, but you don't have to do that. So I'm just reminding you that, hey, the primary oocyte, it will be here. That's a primary, that's a primary, that's a primary, and this is a primary unless, ... and we'll talk about that unless. So let's look at the stages of the follicles. So not only does the oocyte grow and develop, but the follicular cells will also change and grow and develop. And they are changing and developing based on the timing of ovulation. Our very first follicles are called primordial follicles. Okay, that name is very indicative of the timing. It's the very first. Okay, so we have primary oocyte inside of a primordial follicle. Then that will differentiate and grow a little bit into what is called a primary follicle. Okay, it's just all it's doing is just getting a little bit bigger. Okay, it will continue. And by the way, as this is going, when you look at an image of an ovary, that's what this is showing right here. This is kind of just showing the stages. See how we start here? So this little orange speckle would be a primordial follicle. And then do you see how they're getting bigger and bigger and bigger? And then just kind of kicks that secondary oocyte out. That's what ovulation is. That's why these are getting bigger and bigger and bigger, because it's preparing the oocyte to be ejected out of the ovary during ovulation. So that's the timeline of these pictures right here. The primary is going to get a little bit bigger, and we're going to develop this fluid-filled portion called the antrum. I actually didn't write that down. Let me label that real fast. That is the antrum. The other thing about these follicular cells, okay, so by the way, all of this is happening within the fetal period, okay, so this growth right here. And then at puberty, that's when this is happening, okay? They're very responsive. Another reason why why are they getting bigger? Because of estrogen. When is a little girl getting dumped with estrogen? Puberty. Okay, so that's what's kind of instigating this growing period. You know you have a secondary follicle because you see this fluid-filled cavity called the antrum. Okay, so now continuing on, we have okay, see question, secondary follicle starts after puberty. Yes, and actually, yes. So what is instigating the growth from the primary to the secondary is puberty. It's the estrogen that is causing it to grow. So so it's really from here. So I would say puberty is instigating the primary follicles. So we have these at birth and then they go to primary. And at puberty, estrogen will tell the primaries to go to the secondary. And then so on and so forth. This antrum is going to get a lot bigger. And when you guys are looking at your histological images, that is my #1 tip for students when they're asking themselves, how do I know the difference between a secondary follicle and a mature or a Graafian follicle? Look at the antrum. If the antrum is nice and big and that oocyte is pretty much pushed to one side, it's safe to say that is a mature follicle. If the oocyte is kind of centralized still and you just have like a little crescent moon of antrum, it's likely to be a secondary follicle. Okay, so then we still have a primary oocyte, but a mature follicle is the last stage right before ovulation. What kind of oocyte so the question was, so #3 on the previous page, ovulation is the release of what? This is question #3. Ovulation is the release of yeah, very good, secondary oocyte. But wait, you're saying I have a primary oocyte. It is a primary oocyte until right before ovulation. Just before ovulation, okay, we're going to go through meiosis 1, and this will become a secondary oocyte, and then we would have a little polar body, okay? And that's what gets ejected, okay? So that's why this has 2 arrows drawn to it. It starts out as a primary oocyte. but then right before ovulation, it'll go through meiosis 1, and then we would have an or secondary oocyte plus a little polar body, and that's that note I have right there. Okay, so does that make sense to you guys, that little part right there? Okay. Looking at this little cartoon image right here, these numbers line up with these numbers. So this is just another little graphical way you can kind of see how the follicles change in size. And then here, ovulation, that is just that secondary oocyte coming out. Okay. So let's now talk about numbers 5 and 6. Number 5 represents the corpus luteum. You see these cells right here, like these beige colored cells? Those are the follicular cells. So here we had the mature follicle. Remember, what is a follicle? A follicle is the oocyte plus the follicular cells. So here during ovulation, the oocyte gets ejected, but what's left behind? Those follicular cells. And those follicular cells, excuse me, are going to stay behind, and they're going to clump together to form the corpus luteum. And the corpus luteum, luteum actually means saffron yellow. So corpus luteum means yellow body. And the corpus luteum, as well as the corpus albicans, which is number 6, those are important because those structures will help secrete hormones depending on whether or not the woman gets pregnant, okay? So we have 2 main hormones that are involved with the corpus luteum. The corpus luteum is going to secrete progesterone and estrogen. That hormone, progesterone. Gestate means pregnancy. Pro means before. So that's why you may hear progesterone referred to as the pregnancy hormone. And we'll tie this into the next page in just a moment, okay? So just take these little notes now. I think when we answer the questions on the next page, it will all come together. So that corpus luteum is going to secrete progesterone. One of 2 things will happen, which we'll talk about in just a second, because it won't make sense right now. And depending on the timing of the directions, at some point, this corpus luteum will shrivel up into what is called the corpus albicans. Okay. And I'll talk about the timing of that. It's either going to happen pretty immediately or a few months down the line. So we'll address that in just a second. But it will go from a corpus luteum to a corpus albicans, shrivels up. And albin refers to white, so it means a white body. So corpus albicans is the white body. Okay, so let me know, give me a thumbs up. Are you guys doing okay on just the basic stages so far? Okay, very good. So now let's talk about the period. No, yes, we have to talk about periods. Okay. No, I should have written this out on the board for you, but I forgot. Okay, so let's just do this. I'm going to help you fill out this part right up here. Let me wheel you over. Totally forgot to have this written out. Sorry. But we'll just do that right now. Okay. So let's put this down. So stages, let's see here. Okay. Stages of the ovarian cycle. Okay, so I'm just going to put ovarian cycle. So the first one is going to be what? And actually, this would be helpful if you guys could see this. Actually, what am I doing? I'm making this harder on myself. I have almost all the answers written out already. Guys, I did not go to bed last night. I'm terrible. I did sleep. I slept from 8 to 8:20 this morning. I took a 20-minute power nap this morning. So that's why I'm a little crazy right now. Maybe some of you are like, this is how you always are. I have no excuse for all the other times. Okay, all right. So let's talk about the stages of the ovarian cycle. I have it written here already. So your very first blank, okay, so this one right here is going to be the primordial follicle. Okay, then what do you think the second one will be? The primary follicle. So for those first 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Yes, you're just going to fill in. So go ahead and take just a minute. This is the first blank, second blank, third blank, fourth blank. And then we'll fill in those last two. Maybe you already did that. By the way, this is a part, if you're reading this in the textbook and you hear these other terms, you don't have to write this in, but it makes sense now that you see this written out. This is a part of a bigger picture called the follicular phase. So when we're looking at hormone levels between the pituitary gland and the ovaries and how follicle stimulating hormone, all those signals kind of travel to the organs, to and from those organs. This is collectively part of the follicular phase. Then the last two blanks, so the bottom two here, okay, the bottom two, though that is a part of the luteal phase. And the two terms you'll put are corpus luteum and corpus albicans. Oops, can you see that? Okay. My chat box, yeah, very good, Donna. Yeah, my chat box is covering that, so I think you guys can, yes, you can see that part of the board. Okay. So that fills in all the stages of the ovarian cycle, which is essentially this block right here. We just wrote it out, but this pictorially shows the ovarian cycle. So also just remember, and I'm not trying to insult your intelligence or anything, but I know this, it's so easy to kind of lose the big picture. Okay, lose the forest for the trees, as they say. Remember, the ovarian cycle is everything that is happening within the ovary. At the same time, things are happening in the uterus, okay? And that is what we're going to fill in for the phases of the uterine cycle. And there's this whole symphony of hormones kind of going up and down, and depending on those levels, it's telling the ovary to do something, and at the same time, it's telling the uterus to do something or not do something. So let's go over those answers right now. Okay, so the first phase of the uterine cycle, okay, I'm gonna go ahead and erase this. Okay, the first part of the uterine cycle is going to be the menstrual phase. You'll notice when you look over, that corresponds, yeah, very good, with days 1 to 5. So let's think about this. We're basically saying that the start of a woman's period is kind of the starting point for all of this. And a woman's period will last approximately 5 days. Okay, I know some of the ladies are like, what? Okay, but we're just saying approximately 5 days. So during the menstrual phase, the endometrium, the functional layer of the endometrium is shedding. Okay, this is happening at the same time as, when you look over, the primordial or the primary follicles are starting to gear up to start changing into the secondary follicles. Okay, so that's how I want you to look at this. It's kind of like, that's when these things are happening. So then the next one is going to be the proliferative phase. And that happens days 6 to 14. To proliferate means to build anew or build up. And that makes sense, because if a woman just had her menstrual cycle, okay, if she just shed part of her endometrial lining, what does her body need to do? It needs to do what? Build it back up, right? And that happens during the proliferative phase. So maybe that word makes a bit more sense now. And then the last one is called the secretory phase. And this is related to the yellow body and the white body, okay, which is really one or the other. Okay, so during the secretory phase, why does the endometrial lining need to build up? To prepare for potential person to move in. These are the details we're going to look at next week, okay? When a woman becomes pregnant, that little one is going to make his or her way down the fallopian tube and boop, make room or make house within the uterine wall. While a woman has just had her period, now the endometrium is starting to build up. While it's starting to build up, she's ovulating. Okay, that secondary oocyte is out here. If that secondary oocyte becomes fertilized, what does that create? Creates then, yes, excellent, an ovum, okay? And if things continue as they're intended to, very, very quickly, conception happens, bing, we have the start of a new person, okay? What the corpus luteum then does is it secretes progesterone, okay? A pre-pregnancy hormone, okay? Or it's the pregnancy hormone. What that does is it communicates to the uterus, hey, as long as all that progesterone is getting secreted, it's a message to the uterus saying, warning, warning, do not shed your endometrial lining. Stay put. because based on what has happened here, we've got someone on his or her way who's going to move in. That's important, right? Because what happens if you don't have progesterone? If that corpus luteum isn't producing that progesterone, okay, the uterus doesn't receive the instruction. So what is the uterus naturally going to do the next cycle? Shed, and she'll have a period, right? Yes, very good. And that is, that could be a miscarriage, right? Because that happens regardless of what happened up here, because fertilization, conception happens up here, right? So that's why when you hear of people talking about progesterone, maybe women who struggle to keep pregnancies, they might have to take progesterone, maybe injections or pill format. It's to help build up her uterus. It's to promote uterine health. That's also why some forms of birth control are controversial, because some forms of birth control basically are progesterone blockers. And so they prevent progesterone from connecting to the receptors, and that happens regardless of what has happened over here. So that's the controversy with some forms of birth control. Okay, so now we have that filled in. So let's look at the questions there. Oh, so sorry, cut myself off there. So if pregnancy has been accomplished, okay, and that little one makes his or her way into the uterus, okay, soon the baby is going to start producing HCG. Okay, and that's another hormonal indicator of, hey, of what needs to happen here. That corpus luteum will keep producing progesterone for the first trimester of pregnancy, the first 3 months approximately of pregnancy. Once the baby has developed enough, okay, and it's really once the placenta has developed enough, now the placenta takes over that role, and that's when that corpus luteum will shrivel up to the corpus albicans. So if a woman becomes pregnant, this corpus luteum is secreting that pregnancy hormone, progesterone, for the first trimester. Then the placenta is well enough developed to where the placenta takes over, and then it goes, I'm not needed anymore. So it shrivels to the corpus albicans, and then it just continues to degenerate. If a woman does not become pregnant, then this corpus luteum will shrivel to the corpus albicans by the end of that 28-day cycle. And then that's how she'll start her period the next month. So that's the timing of the cycles, okay? So let's look at those questions there. So number 1, what corresponds with day 1 on a 28-day cycle? So what did we say is the first thing? It's the start of her, yeah, very good. It's essentially the start of her period. Okay, so it's the start of the menstrual cycle. And by the way, I'm pretty sure there's a Quizlet card set that has all of this information in it too, which is kind of nice. Okay, during a 28-day cycle, on what day approximately does ovulation occur? So on what day of a woman's cycle is this happening approximately? Yes, day 14. This is why women are asked about the first day of their last menstrual cycle, because approximately 14 days or 2 weeks after the start of her last menstrual cycle is when that ovary is releasing the egg. Ovulation is happening. This is important in family planning. So if you are or are not trying to have children, it's helpful to pay attention to your cycle. It's also nice if you have regular cycles, right? So if you don't, then you got to be a bit more creative or keep track of it a different way. But that's why we care about kind of 2 weeks after the start of a woman's cycle. Okay, what color is the corpus luteum?
Yellow.
Yeah, yellow. And then the corpus albicans? White. Very good. Okay, what is the difference between an oocyte and a follicle? Or maybe you just answer, what is a follicle?
Container. Like container.
Yeah, the follicle is the oocyte plus the follicle cells. Okay, the oocyte is just the gamete. Okay, so remember, oocyte is just the gamete. Okay, so let's look. Let me pull you over here to answer this next question. This is number 6. Okay, secondary follicles contain what kind of oocyte? Secondary follicles contain what kind of oocyte? Yes, very good, Donna. And if you want to just follow my little graphic here, it contains a primary oocyte. The only follicle that would not necessarily have that primary is the mature, but it starts off with a primary, right? And then right before ovulation, it goes to the secondary plus the polar body, okay? And then when looking at a photomicrograph of a mature follicle, what do you look for to determine whether it contains a primary or secondary oocyte? Okay, the thecal cells. Okay, we'll talk about those in just a second. So remember, okay, I like your answer. So remember yeah, very good. So the antrum, so Michelle, the antrum kind of helps you with the mature versus secondary follicle. This question is asking about the oocyte, the little, my little black part right here. So yeah, if you have a polar body, it went through meiosis and now it's secondary plus a polar body. If there's no polar body, then it's just a primary oocyte. Okay. So you guys doing okay on that? Let me know. Let me know how you're doing with that. All right. So let's look at the, okay. So please describe the last questions again. Sure thing. All right, so number 6. So secondary follicles, so remember, a follicle is this whole thing. A secondary follicle contains what kind of oocyte? So just looking at the picture I drew, what did this little black picture represent? A primary oocyte. Remember, primary oocytes are in all of these follicles. And then that's what this little blurb here, that is the word form of my little arrows right here. Okay. So then, secondary follicles contain, yes, a primary oocyte. The exception to that would be the mature follicle. But remember, it starts off with a primary, but just hours before ovulation, right before ovulation, it will go through meiosis 1, and that's when we produce the secondary oocyte, And how do we know, if we were just to look at this, how would we know we had an secondary? Because we know that a secondary is going to produce a polar body. I don't know if you guys can see that. We'll have a secondary oocyte and a polar body. So we would see both of these things over here. Okay, does that help clarify? Okay, okay, very good. All right, so let's look at the, let's do a little bit of the histology stuff. How are we doing on time? Hour 8, holy cow, how did we get here already? I told you on Wednesday, said an hour is gonna fly by. All right, so let's do a little bit of histology real fast. So the ovary is this whole structure. Okay, we're just zoomed in on the ovaries right here. These small structures right here, these small structures right here, those are the primordial follicles. Okay, and then we have the primary follicles. Okay, that would be that right there. And then on this one, I'm not a big fan of this picture because we have this right here. This is, you know, Mrs. Wynn and I discussed this, and she was telling me that this also represents a primary follicle. It's just a little bit farther along in its development. Okay, so this is kind of, so this one right here is basically like kind of the in-between, and then this would be a primary follicle right here, which means this one right here would be a secondary follicle. And we know that to be true because secondary follicles have that antrum right here. Okay, and at least what was the where to? I'm sorry, I didn't see when exactly you put that question there. Okay, good, you got it. Okay, very good. So the other thing too, remember how I was saying in a secondary follicle, that oocyte is still pretty much in the center, and we have this crescent moon-shaped antrum. That's how you know that's a secondary. Okay, so let's look at the next page. Okay, the other thing too, on this next page, we have a primary follicle that matches this image right here. Okay, this mature follicle, that antrum is a lot bigger. And do you see how that oocyte is a lot more so on the edge? That's my biggest tip for secondary versus mature, which is probably what I get the most questions on for the histology stuff. It's the size of the antrum and the location of that oocyte. Is that oocyte kind of towards the center, or is it pushed towards the side? Those two things will help you with that. Okay, Cooper, and what is the one on the bottom right corner? This one is going to be a primary. So on this one, we don't show a secondary. On this one, the secondary would look similar to this, but a much smaller crescent moon shape. Okay, so we just see a primary and a mature follicle there. So on, let me pull this over real fast. And let me just do, I think this will be easier than me showing you on my blank one. I'll show you my answer key. So while you guys are labeling, I'll put this up on the screen. If you don't get everything right now, just when I upload the video, come back to this point, you know, maybe write the time, 1 hour, 13 minutes, right? And then you can come to this part of the video and then just pause it, right? So you can compare your labels with my labels here. Okay, so for these structures right here, when we're talking about the zona pellucida, the cumulus oophorus, those are going to be specific layers of the follicular cells right there. And I also wrote little notes about their functions. They are going to help protect that oocyte, okay? So let me just get to the side here and hold it up. So the zona pellucida and the corona radiata, excuse me. Okay, so I have them as numbers 1 and 3. You can see them surrounding the oocyte right there. And the zona pellucida is really cool because that is a term we're going to see next week when we talk about embryological development. Meaning something's going to happen to that zona pellucida. So maybe put a star by that term so that when you see it again, you're like, oh yeah, I remember that. And that is going to be kind of this transparent layer of cells that surround that oocyte. Then we have the antrum. And just know here, according to, you know, my notes, I just put 4 and 5 here just to show you that the antrum is the space and it's filled with the follicular fluid. Okay. And then the stratum granulosum is just referring to the specific types of specific type of follicular cells. And then the theca folliculi, that's related to the hormones, okay? All right, so again, if you didn't get that, just come back to, we're at 1 hour and 15 minutes, so just go scroll to that part of the video and then hit pause so that you could look at that more. That way we can keep going with the rest of the stuff we have here. Okay, and then the ovary side with the corpus luteum, that's pretty self-explanatory right there. And on these models, if you guys were to see or be tested like on an image like this, literally if it's yellow, it's the corpus luteum. If it's white, it's the corpus albicans. So just remember the words that mean the colors and you'll be good there. Okay. And then for the uterus, you've got the endometrium and the myometrium. We don't make you learn the different portions of the endometrium, okay? That's pretty self-explanatory, not too bad there. Okay, so you guys okay on this? Let's see, can you send Canvas message with a picture that was left out? It's blurry on my screen. Yeah, and if I don't do that, send me a message on Canvas, okay? If I don't do that, especially if you don't see it by tomorrow, it's because I just forgot, okay? So remind me. All right. Okay, let's talk quickly. I just want to give you a quick note about the cat. I do already have a video with the kitty cat, and there's something that is very interesting about the kitty, the female kitty. Our uterus, I say our, I mean a human, And you can stay on this page, okay? I'm just gonna refer to this for a minute. A female human's uterus looks like an upside down pear. A feline female uterus looks like a slingshot, okay? Or it looks like the letter Y. Do you see that? What? Okay. All that to say is I see so many mistakes on this quiz. The quiz and the practical. So especially for the practical, remember that your questions are grouped together. So if you're in the reproductive system, you shouldn't be putting in answers that could go in another body system, okay? But students tell me all the time when I'm testing them over the female reproductive system, they'll say these are ureters, right? Do you guys remember the term ureter? Ureters are what? Those connect the kidney to the bladder. Do you see the ureters are these brown things? These are not ureters. And I get that. When you guys, if you haven't already done so, which is fine, go watch my cat video over this. And you can see some of the specimens, they're very small. And so I understand how you could maybe right off the bat think that. But I always say, remember, if you're answering questions about the reproductive system, I am not going to be asking a urinary system answer, right? It'll be reproductive. And then also make sure you're looking at what that passageway or tube connects to so that you know for sure what you're talking about. So here in the feline, this is her uterus. Those two parts there, what? Okay, her uterus looks like the letter Y. And there are two structures called the uterine horns. And the little kittens, okay, and dogs are the same way. They get they'll just move in, the individual pups or kittens get their little spot. And that is how dogs and cats can have litters of puppies and kittens, because they can have multiple little babies within the uterine horn. That will combine to form the uterine body. And those numbers correspond with these numbers right up here. So the nice thing is those are already labeled for you. You can just kind of look across, but I always recommend that even though it's already numbered and labeled for you, have this open while you're watching the cat dissection video so you can see what the real example looks like. And I did notice, Mrs. Wynn had some screenshots of my video for the urinary system. So I don't know if she's going to take screenshots from my other videos, but just prepare as if she does, okay? And I don't know, because she's the one that's putting those questions together. So I think that might help you prepare for a specimen style question if you see that on the quiz. Okay. Oh my word. Okay, you guys doing okay? Yes. So at this point, I'm going to go over, especially for the folks that weren't here for Wednesday session, I'm going to take a little bit of time just to talk over these. So if you guys want to stay and hear this again, you can. But if you were here for the Wednesday session, I'm pretty much going to repeat everything I said last time. You won't hear anything new necessarily. Or if you just want to watch it after I'm done with this and I put it on YouTube and send the link, you can just check out and do that again. So I'll probably take, oh my word, we've gone 1 hour and 22 minutes, right? I don't think I'm gonna take more than 15 minutes to go over this. The other reason too is because I'm still having to record videos, and so I need to film more stuff. And I'm gonna be talking about these things in an individual video for this chapter, okay? So that's kind of the other reason why I don't want to spend too much time on it. But I want to at least cover the terms in the sense of this is where this term is. Okay, so let me go over, I'll use this plaque here. Okay, I'll use this plaque. I didn't use this last time, but that's okay. I think we have pictures of this on Quizlet. So I did want to try to use a model that I'm pretty sure you would have Quizlet questions from. And maybe, let's see here. I don't even know if this will stay up here. No. And then let me try this. Guys, look at my stand here. I'm so fancy, right? That's a bone box, and these are like my reflex hammers. And here you thought I was like all high tech and had all the gizmos, right? No, we are homemade over here. All right. Let me try to zoom in as much as I can here. Oi, sorry for the earthquakes. Oh, you know what? I just got an idea. Let's reuse my props. Hey. Okay. All right, so let's start at the top and just kind of work our way down and answer those questions. So we have the vulva, and the vulva is going to be composed, that's the general term we use to describe the female external genitalia. So it's composed of those various structures there. We have the mons pubis, which is this area right here. Mons means mountain. Pubis refers to the pubic area. So it is the pubic mountain. And I get students asking all the, what is this? Fat. Okay, adipose tissue. So the mons pubis really just describes the surface portion right here. And during puberty, this is where pubic hair grows. So kind of think, if it's helpful to think mons pubis is where pubic hair grows. Okay, and then we have the labia. We have, so those are paired structures. So labia majora describes the pair. Labia minora describes the other pair, excuse me. So labium majus is singular, labium minus is also singular. And because we have a mid-sagittal view here, we're only seeing one half. And this would be, so anterior, posterior, therefore we're only seeing the right half of the pair. So number 12 here would represent the right labium majus. Number 11 would represent the right labium minus. And on Wednesday, we talked about analogous structures, okay? And analogous structures means that when, so at conception, our genotypic sex is determined, meaning just what chromosomes you have, XX or XY. We'll talk about that more next week. But our phenotypic sex, meaning our physical characteristics, don't become as crystal clear until about the 7th week of pregnancy, gestation. And so the way I like to describe it is similar ingredients, different recipe, right? So the analogous structures means that if you're a biological male, these parts will turn into this. If you're a biological female, these parts will turn into this, and they are very different, okay? They're unique to each biological sex. So the labia majora is analogous with the scrotum. What? Okay, and every time I say that out loud, right? Doesn't matter how many years I've been teaching this, I'm just like, do I technically have a scrotum? I mean, if you're just looking at the ingredients, yeah. But then you could say the same thing about a male scrotum. Do males technically have labia majora? Okay, don't get crazy with this, but it's just kind of cool to see, okay, this or that, right? Okay, so the labium minus, okay, or the labia minora, that is actually, and I don't know if I said this on Wednesday, I think I forgot to say this, but that is actually analogous with the prepuce. What is the prepuce? You guys remember that from last week? That is the foreskin, yes. So in females, the analogous structures, okay, the labia majora would be analogous with the scrotum. The labia minora would be analogous with the prepuce. What? Weird. Okay, so then we have the clitoris, that's number 13 here, right there, and that is analogous with the male penis. What? Okay, so then we have the vestibule. And the vestibule, okay, how I say this in class, we have to go to this terrifying image right here, okay? And the vestibule is just going to describe this space right here. Okay, if you guys couldn't tell, man, when I was starting to be, to be a doctor, I was wanting to be like a trauma surgeon, ortho surgeon, ER doctor. The thought of doing the female stuff, I'm just a complete wuss, okay? I can't do it. So, and you think, but you're a female. No, I just can't. So some of this stuff I'm like, okay, I know you're like uncomfortable hearing this. Part of me is uncomfortable to talk about this, right? But it is what it is, right? It's a human body. It's wonderful, actually. Okay, so the vestibule is this area right here. And this addresses question number 2. Name the 2 openings that are enclosed by the vestibule. That would be the urethral opening and the vaginal. So the external urethral orifice and the vaginal orifice. Recall that males have 2 openings to the external environment, the external urethral orifice and the anus. Females have 3, external urethral orifice, the vaginal orifice, and then the anus. Okay, so then going to the vagina is technically, so on this model here, we just need to remind ourselves, okay, the urinary system is anterior. Bladder, that's the urethra. Here's the uterus. And the tunnel right here, is there a number? Okay, it's number 9 on this model right here. That is the vagina. And a lot of people will kind of call everything the vagina, and whatever. I don't, lay people, whatever, that's fine. But the vagina is technically this canal portion right here, the vaginal canal. And so this is answering question number 1. The hymen partially covers the opening of what passageway? That would be the vagina. And that would be located in this area right here. We don't typically have a number or, this number right here, it's number 10. I would say that I don't know that represents the hymen on this model. I would say more likely it represents the vaginal orifice, which is the opening, and the hymen is in that area, okay? Let's see. Okay, and then we have the fornix. So the fornix here, and I'll put this up because I always get questions on this one. the fornix is going to be number 14. Okay, see how these spaces kind of come upwards like this? The fornix actually refers to like a bird beak shape. We, and you may or may not remember this from AP1, but we have a fornix in the brain. And so these spaces that go upwards like that, that's what the fornix is. And then we talked about the hymen. Okay, then we have the greater vestibular gland, and that is not on that model. Okay, so let me show you in the lab manual. In the lab manual, it is on this one, is that tiny little orange. You see that right there, the tiny little orange gland? And that is going to be analogous to the bulbourethral gland. Which is what we saw in the male reproductive system last week. It's also known in females, so it's called a Cowper's gland in males. In females, it's also known as a Bartholin gland. Okay, question, what is the purpose of it going up like that? Okay, so the fornix, so part of it, and I need to read the details on that again, but part of it is that this area right here is the cervix, and it kind of helps make the shape of the cervix right here, which is represented on this model by number 6. But let me read more resources on that so I can answer that question a bit better. Okay, so then, okay, the uterus. Okay, so let me grab this model again. Okay, so we have the cervix. Okay, so here's the fornix right here, and the cervix is basically what my finger is covering right here. It's just like the bottom, you know, ½ inch to inch. I call it the entryway into the uterus. Okay, so if we look at it this way, you can see how it's its own like projection of tissue. Okay, so that's just this portion right here is the cervix, and then everything else is the uterus. We have a fundus of the uterus. You guys remember I said we have when we're talking about the stomach, we had the fundus of the stomach. We have a fundus of the uterus as well. Okay, that's this, and then we have the body. Then we have those 3 layers. The endometrium is the innermost layer. That's this kind of reddish portion right here. Then the middle is the myometrium. M for middle, M for myo, and it's the thickest. It's made of muscle. That's really important when a woman is giving birth. She needs to have a lot of muscular tissue to help squeeze and deliver the baby. And then the perimetrium is this part on the outside. Okay, so the perimetrium is the outermost layer. Okay, and then we have the uterine tube or the fallopian tubes. Okay, that's what this area, this structure is right here. And we have different parts of it. We have the fimbriae, and the fimbriae are those finger-like projections. And the cool thing is, so this is addressing question number 3. Are the fallopian tubes attached directly to the ovary? They are not. Yeah, very good. They're just kind of hanging over there. But during ovulation, the fimbriae will kind of descend and hover over that ovary. And so what gets ejected? What gets ovulated? What gets released from that ovary? A what? You guys remember? I've heard so many terms. Secondary oocyte. Yeah, so that, very good. So the secondary oocyte goes pew out, and those fimbriae are going to kind of do this peristaltic motion to help draw the oocyte into the fallopian tube, into that uterine tube. Okay, so it's kind of a really cool thing that happens there. Excuse me. Okay. And then the ampulla, remember an ampulla is anywhere that's kind of widened, a widened portion. That's this portion right here. And that ampulla is prime real estate for fertilization. You'll hear me repeat that next week. And then we have the right and the left ovaries. And let's see, we don't show, okay, the artery on that one. So let me just show you in the lab manual. Okay, so here we have the little red and blue blood vessels right there. That's the ovarian artery and vein. We notice that it's inside of a ligament, and we'll talk about those ligaments right now. Okay, let me just want to make sure I don't skip over too many of these questions or move too far away from them. So then, okay, what is another name for the uterine tubes? Fallopian tubes. That's the eponym, which means it's like the named after someone. But uterine tubes is fine as well. Which is the thickest layer of the uterus? That is the myometrium. And now let's talk about the ligaments. Okay, so the broad ligament, so as I said on, yeah, very good, Elizabeth. Yeah, myometrium, very good. So as I said on Wednesday, this is a posterior view. So maybe highlight and circle that if you think you're gonna mix that up, which I would do that very easily. Okay, it's a posterior view, which means this is the right side and this is the left side, because this is the back side. And we get very used to saying, oh, right, left. We're so used to seeing it from the front side, but that's not the perspective here. And the reason why I want to point that out is because of this tissue called the broad ligament. It spans a broad area, and it is continuous with the perimetrium, but on the anterior side of the uterus. Excuse me. So we only see the broad ligament on the anterior side. On this side, we've just taken it away to see other structures. Okay, and then we have the, okay, so number 6, the perimetrium is continuous with the broad ligament. Number 7, the ovarian ligament. Oh, sorry. So let me, before we go to number 7, let's talk about the suspensory ligament. The suspensory, excuse me, ligament is going to suspend the ovaries. That's how I like to think. It's going to suspend the ovary. And it's very similar to something we saw in the male reproductive system last week. What is that? Because these vessels are inside of it. They're enclosed within it. So what does that remind us of from last week? That reminds us of the spermatic cord. Yeah, very good, Cooper. Yeah, the spermatic cord. Okay. And oh, I forgot to talk about the round ligament. So the round ligament on this, okay, so on this model, we can see the round ligament. That would be number 29. And that round ligament attaches the anterior portion of the uterus to the lower abdominal pelvic wall. Here on this, on figure 11-1, that is this ligament right there. That is the round ligament. It attaches the anterior portion of the uterus to the lower abdominal pelvic wall. Pregnant women can experience something called round ligament pain. And that's kind of this phenomena as the uterus is stretching. Things kind of get pulled on, and that can cause a little bit of a cramping sensation. Cramping, typically a scary thing in pregnancy, but round ligament pain, very benign, meaning not harmful at all, even though it's causing discomfort. And then, okay, so now let's look at number 7. So number 7, the ovarian ligament. The ovarian ligament connects the what? Ovary to the uterus. So the ovarian ligament connects the ovary to the uterus. Okay, so then the last thing we have is the mammary gland, also known as the breast. So we have 2 mammary glands. Here in this, I could probably just put this up like this. We have 2 mammary glands, but they're also known as breasts, and there are different structures inside. So we have lobes inside. So that's what these kind of large structures are. They're orange in your lab manual. So these orange structures right here are the lobes. Those are what actually produce milk. And when milk is produced, they're going to go through these little passageways called lactiferous ducts. So remember that word duct means a passageway. So these little ducts right here, those tiny little purple ones that are attached to the lobes, those are the lactiferous ducts. And then your next term is sinus. It will connect, that passageway will connect the lobe to the sinus. So the sinuses, the lactiferous sinuses, are these little kind of swollen purple parts right there. Okay. On the model, you have these tiny little, so here are the lobes, you have these little ducts, these little tiny passageways, and the sinuses are these little kind of swollen parts right here. Those will have their own little passageway to the external part of the mammary gland. And where those little passageways come out, that specifically is the nipple. Okay, so in your lab manual, the nipple is just this portion right here with those little passageways. Okay, and then the portion, the pigmented portion surrounding the nipple, that is the areola. So on a frontal view, it's much easier to see. On your lab manual, it's kind of it's just the part that's above and below the nipple right there. Now, here is a really cool thing about the mammary gland and pregnancy. So my AMP1 students, right before your session, I was with them and we were talking about the eye and the ear. Do you guys remember that lab? It was your last lab in AMP1. And we talk about rods and cones. And the cool thing to think about is that babies, when they're born, have very poorly developed cones. If you recall, cones are responsible for your sharp acuity color vision. And rods are more of your like contrast, black and white. So when we're, whenever during daytime, when you're trying to focus on the colors behind me, you're mostly using your cones. At nighttime, when you're driving and you're looking for road signs, you're mostly using your rods. Well, when babies are born, they're primarily using their rods. Their cones are taking time to develop. So think about, what does that mean about their vision? They have kind of crummy vision, right? They can only see in what? Contrast colors. During pregnancy, a woman's areola, the pigment, okay, the melanin in her skin in that area will become darker. So why would that happen in a pregnant woman? the very curious thing. Okay, let's think about it. If a baby comes out, where's baby's food? Right here. Babies cannot see well, right? But if the woman's body has made her areola darker, is that going to make it easier for baby to find his or her food? What in the world, right? I like, what? This just happens, right? I promise you, the mother does not have to say, okay, areola, darken. I really need my baby to find his food. No, her body just responds to the little life inside of her by doing that. There's in some cultures, when the baby is born, they'll just put the baby on the mama's torso, and it's called rooting. And it's this reflex, and these newborn babies, it's almost like creepy looking, but it's fascinating at the same time. Like, you can't stop looking, but you're like, ooh. And these little tiny babies will kind of crawl and find the mama's breast and start nursing. And it's just one of those cool things I love talking about, because it's a little preview into our last topic together, your last topic in A&P lab. Holy cow. But then it's also a bridge back to something that you guys looked at in A&P 1. So it's really fascinating to me to kind of tie everything, a lot of things together at this part of the semester. So to answer those last questions you have, number 8, the mammary gland is going to secrete milk, which is made of proteins, fats, and lactose. Other cool things as well. Man, oh man, if you're just curious, or if you just want to read about some amazing stuff, read about breast milk, okay? And I preface that by saying I'm not one of these women that's like, breast is best, out with my picket or anything like that. Fed is best, okay? So you just need to make sure our babies get fed. There are lots of reasons why women don't want to or can't breastfeed, but there is a medical and scientific reason why breastfeeding is promoted. It's because in addition to those proteins, fats, lactose, babies receive, it also helps their immune systems. And some research has shown that when babies nurse, okay, this is also going to that positive feedback mechanism, stuff we looked at way back in the beginning of AP1. The mama's body releases, the suckling triggers mama's body to produce oxytocin, which releases the milk. By the way, that milk is stored in the lactiferous sinuses prior to release from the nipple. And that hormone oxytocin helps to do that. And it will keep doing that until the positive feedback mechanism, or stimulus, I should say, which is the baby feeding, stops. When the baby stops, then that tells mama's body, okay, we don't need to do that anymore. What we've seen in some research is that when the baby suckles, some of the saliva will go in through those ducts and passageways. And mama's body picks up on that and like runs it through her body computer system. However the heck it happens, it's literally like, I need to read, it's been a while since I've read about it, but her body kind of scans what was in the baby's saliva. And if the baby is lacking things, her body can group and put things together in the next feeding so baby gets what he or she needs. Again, what? It's just incredible, right? So, and it's tailored to that specific baby. So that is one reason why you'll hear people, if a woman can, they will highly suggest that she breastfeeds because of the benefits it has, the health benefits it has for the child. Okay. Oh my word. Okay. That was a lot. A minute. You wish it was a minute 52. No, that was an hour and 52 minutes. Oh, you guys are rock stars. You are seriously rock stars. Okay, great question. What about a wet nurse? Okay, so if you don't know, a wet nurse is a person, is a lactating woman who's able to breastfeed other babies. Would another woman be able to feed a different baby? And you know, I actually haven't read much about how that might differ with a wet nurse. So now I'm curious. I'm really curious now. Yeah. Okay. Another question. What are the two openings that are enclosed by the vestibule? No, that's okay. So it's the external urethral orifice and the vaginal orifice. Oh yeah. And I have my poll for you. Now my AP1ers, okay, so I'm gonna make the poll available. And these are just questions I typed up, they're just review. So, and your answers are anonymous. So I've launched the poll, that should pop up, and you'll just see a bunch of questions there. For those of you who are watching the recorded session, I'm going to read the questions out loud because I did quickly zoom into my last session and none of this showed up on the screen, okay? So for those of you that are in the live session right now, go ahead and just answer those questions. They're totally anonymous. And I'm more so just wondering, my students had submitted theirs, but on my end, it said no one had done it. So I kind of want to just, don't worry about getting anything right or wrong, or at least just answer the very last question. And I'm curious to see how the poll feature works in the Zoom meetings. So for those of you who are watching the recorded session, I'll go over the questions right now. And these are just meant to kind of be a good review. Hey, do I have a good idea of what's going on here? So number one, what is the female gamete called? Spermatocyte or oocyte? Number two, true or false? A female is born with all the oocytes she will ever have in her lifetime. And really, I'm saying the primary oocytes she will have in her lifetime. So is she born with all of the primary oocytes she will have in her lifetime? True or false? Number three, what kind of, I wrote I must have been sleep deprived last night too, because I forgot I wrote this. Number three, what kind of oocytes are present in a female's ovaries at birth? Are they oogonia? Are they primary oocytes? Are secondary oocytes? Or ova? Ova is just plural for ovum. And then number four, true or false? All females have produced ova. So true or false? All females have produced ova. Number five, what is a follicle? Is it an oocyte? Are they follicle cells? Or are they the oocyte plus follicle cells? Or is it hair? And then number six, what kind of follicle is related to ovulation? Is it a primordial follicle? Is it a primary follicle? Oh, and I should have said oocyte. Terrible question. I meant to put oocyte because now I see why I have all these answers. Well, okay, yeah, follicle over here. Bad teacher. So what kind of oocyte is related to ovulation? That would be, was it a primordial, a primary, secondary, or sorry, I'm so sorry. Would it be a primary, secondary? Secondary oocyte is related to ovulation. That is just a terrible question. That would get thrown out with the garbage. Okay, and number seven, the corpus luteum is the color what? Red, black, yellow, white. Number eight, the corpus albicans is the color red, black, yellow, or white. And again, if you're watching this at home, just hit pause after you hear me share the question and the answers, and then just think about it. And then number nine, The reproductive organs in a feline specimen resembles which letter of the alphabet? A, E, I, O, U, or Y? And then my last question, how do you feel about this material? Good, or okay, but I need to study more, or meh, I'm not so sure, or no, we're not talking about this. We're just not talking about this. And it's okay. You can be at that point, but I hope you're not at that point by the time you quiz over it. Okay, another question I see, what are the two, oh no, we answered that one already. And okay, I think that's that. Oh my word, you guys are such troopers. Okay, okay, another question real fast. Can you discuss the teamwork survey, and has anything been decided about the final yet? Do you know if the final will be on the same day that it was originally scheduled for when we were face to face? Okay, so we are finalizing the directions for the for that oral presentation. What we're trying to do right now is we're trying to make it easy for you to do on Canvas, because originally it was going to be like either you fill in a PDF document or you do a Word document, you got to attach it and all this stuff. So we're in the process of trying to figure out if there's a way for us to basically make a little Canvas assignment and you go in and you just click, 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 and we're done. So I don't have the details on that yet, because I'm not actually involved in the actual like putting together of that. I'm just involved in kind of talking about how we want it to look. But we are wanting to get that out like yesterday, really. We're trying to get that out as quickly as possible. And then for the final, we're still finalizing the number of questions for that. It will look a little bit differently than what the first practical looked like. And so right now we're just making sure that the format we have is going to work. And then also, don't quote me on this, but I'm almost positive you're going to have a time frame to take it in. And it's the same reason we kind of have an open schedule for the quizzes. We know you guys have different schedules and different responsibilities, and so I know we want to make it so that you can take the practical when it works best for you within our allotted time frame. So I'm almost positive that's how that's going to work. I know right now we put some I'm not going to say any dates because I don't want to put any dates out there. We're just confirming that the dates that we have in mind for that work with your guys's lecture finals as well. So we're just making sure that we're not like going to just mess anything up, basically. Okay. All right. Oh my word. Your classmates who are not here are going to vomit when they see that the YouTube video is 2 hours long. Oh man. And I don't know, would I even want to watch a 2-hour video? Or I don't know, maybe I'll just have it on in the background while I'm cleaning or something. Okay. Well, you guys, thank you so much. You did great. I really hope going through this on the board was helpful. And I just really want to compliment you again. I know you guys are making the best out of this. I know how hard you guys are working, and there's a lot of extra stuff that's happening in your lives that are just creating speed bumps and hiccups. And I just want to commend you for continuing to do your best. So, okay, oh my word. Well, I don't know, go eat some cake or something after this session because you've earned it. That was a lot, right? Okay, well, I'm going to be working on recording the videos for the models. It'll be essentially what we just went over today, but in a more permanent format. And I hope you guys do well. I hope you have a great rest of the weekend. And you'll probably hear from me again Monday. I'm thinking is when I'm hoping we'll have more solid word on these next few assignments coming up. Okay, well, you guys take care. Keep up the good work.